so thank you for coming out. Happy to be here. It's been a while. My research is motivated by two questions together. First one is how minds work, whether they're human minds or animal minds or artificial minds. And the second one is how to make smart software agents. And I've got an overall answer to that. At least one way is to copy them after humans. But this is all I'm going to say about that, because the rest of the talk is about the first question, how do minds work, not about the second. Okay. People have talked about minds for at least a couple of thousand years, maybe longer. I suppose definitions have been given, but I'm not sure that I've ever seen one. You know, the philosophers talk about it, and I'm sure some must have defined it, you know, but I haven't seen the definition. But I'd like to give you a definition that will help to set the context for the rest of the talk. So here's the definition. Mind is a control structure for an autonomous agent. Yeah. Well, control structure, I guess everybody will be quite all right with. And the question is, what's an autonomous agent? Well, here's what it is, according to Bracer and myself. It's a system embedded in and part of an environment that satisfies several conditions. It has to sense its environment. It has to act on it. It has to act on it over time, not just once. A check writing program won't be an autonomous agent. It has to do it in its pursuit of its own agenda, which is what makes it autonomous. And it needs to act in such a way that its actions may affect what it senses in the future. It's got to be coupled to its environment in that way. And this is another way of stating Maturana and Varela's structural coupling to the environment is what this is. And to our mind, that's a key point for an autonomous agent. If it doesn't do this, it's not one. All right. So what we're looking for is how to control structures for autonomous agents work. Yeah. And if I had an answer, what would it look like? What would be an answer to how do minds work? Well, it would be a cognitive model. So a cognitive model simulates and predicts cognitive processing and behavior, and therefore tells us how minds work. What it does. Cognitive here, in the way it's used, is written broad. I'm using the broad sense that includes things that are not always included there. Perception, emotion, action. Some people, cognitive is often used for higher level cognition, you know, planning, reasoning, volitional decision making, that kind of thing. But we're taking it here. I'll use it ambiguously. I'll use it in both senses in this talk. Cognitive model can be conceptual, it can be computational, it can be mathematical, it can be any two of the three, it can be all three of them. Yeah. It can include a cognitive architecture, its underlying representational structure, and its processes. And it may model some single cognitive phenomenon, or it may be systems level. It may include everything from an incoming stimulus to an outgoing action and everything in between. And although most cognitive models are not system level, that's all I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk. The lighter cognitive model is comprehensive in the sense of the system level. It takes in perception, cognition, action. It's embodied in what sense the body of the agent influences its cognition. Yeah, it's situated in that its cognition is influenced by the environment in which it finds itself. It's interactive in the sense that it's, if you look at an incoming stimulus and an outgoing action, it's not a pipeline, a straight line in between. There are lots of modules and they interact in all kinds of ways, as you'll see in a bit. The model is a conceptual model, and it's partly computational. Why partly? Because it's a lot easier to add the conceptual pieces than it is to implement the computation. And we can never catch up. So it's always partly computational. And it provides an architecture for software, intelligent software agents and cognitive robots. And we talked about human minds, animal minds, and artificial minds. Well, these are the two artificial minds. Intelligent software agents and cognitive robots. Okay. The LIDAR model is built around, it's based upon what both the psychologists and the neuroscientists call the action perception cycle. So really, yeah. It says that every autonomous agent must cyclically and frequently sense its environment, assess its situation, select a response, and act. It has to look around, see what's going on, figure out how that relates to what's going on inside, internally with it, and figure out what it needs to do about it. There's the one, and it's got to do this quickly. It's got to do it fast enough to avoid dangers and to take advantage of opportunities. So it has to be done quite frequently. And essentially, there's one eternal question that comes up all the time. What do I do next? In some sense, that's the only question there is, because I'm constantly, whatever else I'm doing, I'm constantly answering this question. And we'll see, I'm probably answering it 5 to 10 times a second, which is a lot. Okay. Cognitive cycle processing. The basic hypothesis is that human cognitive processing is by a continuing iteration of these cognitive cycles. Each one lasts some 200 to 500 milliseconds, fraction of a second. They're not really cycles in that one happens and another and another. They can overlap. They cascade. Several cycles have parts running simultaneously in parallel. But there's also some seriality to it, that consciousness maintains a serial order and maintains the illusion of continuity. Now, what do I say, illusion? We are actually continuous in little frames, like movie frames, with times in between that we're not conscious. But it's discrete rather than continuous. But it happens rapidly enough that we see it as, we think of it, we experience it as being continuous. And then the corollary to the first hypothesis is the higher level processing is composed or accomplished by multiple cognitive cycles. It acts on this cognitive atoms. You put them together, make other things happen.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
With expertise, it's a question about chunking. So if you have a lot of experience,
yeah,
you might chunk things, like you see this as a
sure.
classroom as opposed to,
Yeah.
In your current thinking, is if you have more in a chunk because you're an expert, you're highly knowledgeable,
yeah.
Does that influence the duration of the cycle?
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah, I would suspect that we don't know that. We do have we have some empirical evidence about the lengths of cycles, but none that would answer that question.
Okay.
The cognitive cycle can be thought of as having phases, 3 phases. If sensory input comes in, And the first phase is that perceiving it and understanding what's going on. And this takes into account not only what's come in, but also what's going on with the agent internally. And so, there's a lot more going on that can be dealt with in a small fraction of a second. So the second phase is the tension, where most of what's going on gets filtered out and only the most salient gets let through. Once that salient is determined, it gets broadcast out in the third cognitive cycle, in the third phase of the cognitive cycle, which is the action and learning phase. Learning happens in a profligate manner all the time in lots of different memories. I'll talk to you about that in a bit. And then in the action phase, an action must be selected and it must be executed. At this point, we answer the question, what do I do next? And then we have an output and we do it. So these are the three phases. But again, they're not like one than another. This one's going on all the time. This one is sort of going on all the time, except every once in a while, conscious content gets picked out and broadcast. And this one has stuff that's going on all the time, but it really depends upon it is put into action when the content comes. When the content comes, that's when that third phase. So they're a little different from one another. Memory researchers cut up the memory pie in myriad different ways. And this is my way over a piece of one. They come in sort of two categories. They're the lumpers and the splitters. The lumpers want to have a few big hunks of memory, and the splitters want to have lots of little bitty ones that do different things. I'm sort of halfway in between. But there are people like Larry Squire, for example, who would draw something not very different from this. So it's these memory systems going this way along the top line, we have duration. Sensory memory is sometimes called iconic memory, only lasts for some few tens of milliseconds, a few tens of milliseconds. And it does also some early feature detection that's going on in there. It does have some processing with it. Badly's working memory has a duration of some few tens of seconds. And there you've got mostly events. Transient episodic memory, Conway's memory, lasts for a few days for a few hours or a day, kind of thing. What did you have for breakfast yesterday morning? So that you could get out of this memory. What did you have for breakfast 3 weeks ago Sunday? Well, you're not going to get that anywhere. Right. And long-term memory might not last long at all, but could last a lifetime. Some of us have memories that go back lots of decades. But below this long-term memory gets divided up essentially by what's being remembered, by the data structure in that memory. Perceptual associative memory is that's mostly recognition memory of objects, emotions, actions, people, events, all kinds of things get recognized. Declarative memory gets broken down into autobiographical memory of events in real life, and semantic memory, which is memory of rules and facts and that kind of thing. And procedural memory is memory of really what to do when is the way we use it. Although some people also use it as how to do, memory of how to do things. We have a different memory for that. I actually am more of a splitter than this. We have some others. We have spatial memory that you'll see. We have sensory motor memory. We have attentional memory. And we even have at least one kind of memory we don't have a name for. Let me take you through a quick tour of the LIDA cognitive cycle. Now keep in mind as you go through this with me that all this is happening in 200 to 500 milliseconds. And it's cascading.
Emergency alert, sorry. I don't know how to turn this on. Flash flood warning. We're on high ground.
We're used to it. We had, before you guys came, we had static in the room. We had to pull the plugs on the speakers.
See, when you speak, we have floods. We just wow.
And that comes from a Bayesian causal model.
Perceptual associated memory.
Okay. This is one time when it really will help to take a look to notice the captured the legend over here. The ones in cream are essentially short-term memory, but each of these memories has processing that goes on with it. It learns things, it decays things, it can send things out to other memories, these kinds of things. And then we have longer-term memories. This short-term here means something like no more than a few tens of seconds. Long-term is anything longer than that. Most of the arrows are passing information, not all of them, unfortunately. And the ones in rust color are the conscious broadcast. Notice that it goes essentially everywhere. It actually goes some other places that the arrow, you can get the arrows to talk to. But notice also that almost all of them are learning of one kind or another, including updating and that kind of thing. And the one that's not learning is recruiting schemes. But we'll get to that. So from either the internal or the external environment, some sensory stimulus comes out, sensory memory holds it for a little bit, operates on it with feature detectors, and sends it in two different directions simultaneously. One to perceptual associative memory, where anything that's recognizable in there that's known gets recognized and sent to the current situational model as part of the percept. What comes this way into the current situational model is for new things that have a new object that you've never seen before, a new person you haven't met, something that has to be dealt with. Anything new that hits the current situational model cues perceptual associative memory, spatial memory, transient episodic, declarative. All four of these get cued. When something gets cued here and gets sent back, that itself is used as a cue. Whenever anything new gets cued to all these things. Anything that comes back turns around and gets served as a cue again. Notice that this is going on all the time. No matter what cycle is happening, this thing is just doing its thing. Yeah. All right. And here you have structure building codes, and look at what's going on here. They help to build new objects when you need it. They build an option, I'm feeling thirsty, and then they give me an option of drinking beer, water, orange juice. They build several of these options. Any thought that comes to my mind is built by one of these structure building codes. You know, if I begin to daydream, it's a structure building codeless that are doing it. That's what's building the daydreaming for me. And all of this together, that I've talked to you about so far, this make up the perception and understanding phase, the first of the phases. The attention phase is also going on essentially all the time. we've got attention codelets, little processes. Each one of them has its own thing that it likes and thinks is salient and wants to bring to consciousness. One of them may want to bring anything that moves to consciousness. Another will want to bring any loud noise. One of them might want to bring static to consciousness. Which comes up. Anyway, so an attention codelet, once it sees the kind of thing, the kind of structure that it is interested in there, it grabs it, makes what we call a coalition, and moves it over to the global workspace. And these coalitions accumulate over here until some trigger is reached, in which case the conscious broadcast happens along all these rust-colored arrows. And that's the second of the phases. But notice they're phases only in one sense. Yes.
I think I might have asked you this before, but is there any room in this model at all for sort of what you might call endogenous action? I mean, some kind of a component where the autonomous agent is not merely a responsive system to the inputs, but is in fact engaged in active searching or something.
Look, keep in mind that the input may very well be from internal stuff. So the input might be my thirst. Okay. And then I look around for something to drink. A loud noise. All the noise is from outside. I turn my head, but that's not what you're asking.
Well, what I'm talking about is something more like searching, wandering, exploratory behavior.
Yes.
So that would be a sort of internal stimulus that somehow built into
You're going to have to do that for learning. Yeah. You can't really learn, and we haven't really got to the details of that. That's something that's not actually in the model as yet, but it's going to be.
You're talking about mind wandering, or
I'm thinking about the way human input acts. I mean, there's just so much
with
endogenous motion and stuff.
Spontaneous motion.
It looks like that.
That could go into the internal environment also, like just whatever is coming back from the.
Well, but I think if I'm, I know where it's coming from. It would have to be generated without a stimulus, I think.
Well, without an external stimulus. Or you think of an internal stimulus as being motivation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the stimulus is in the mind, and that's not built in, is it?
Yeah, it would be an internal environment.
Yeah, but
the answer is yes. It will work, and we will have it in the model.
The thing is, I think you probably will say yes, you're right. It looks like it's underplayed in this diagram if I understand the way the human input operates, because they do so much building of things on the basis of what they themselves generate with action.
But look, I generate all my actions all times. That's not true of infants. It's true of adults. It's true of all of us.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My inclination is to think that there's an exploratory that may change with time.
There will be an exploratory force. So we will build explorations. We even have a name for it. We call it curiosity, don't we? We've got an emotion. It's a motivating factor. That's in the model. We've written about it all the time. All right. Then this takes us to the third. Then we have all of this learning that happens. But here we have recruiting of schemes. The scheme gives us an idea of what happens if you take a certain action in a given context. You expect a certain result with some likelihood, and so. But these are fairly abstract. So the ones that can respond reasonably to the current situation, which comes through the conscious broadcast, get picked out, and they get instantiated by having to see here. These things are abstract, but you want to send forward something that's very specific and has all its variables bound. And that becomes a behavior. And the behaviors accumulate in action selection. And every once in a while, when a certain trigger happens, one behavior is selected and sent forth. And in sensory motor memory, you have motor plan templates, which are, again, abstract. But the behavior is specific, so it gets the variables bound in the abstract motor plan template in a particular one. And a motor plan comes out. The motor plan gets executed, and it uses sensory memory where it gets a direct connection that comes through without consciousness. And then execution happens. By the way, don't get hooked on dorsal and ventral streams. That's used in neuroscience only in the visual system. We're using it as an analogy throughout everything. So again, all of this is occurring in 200 to 500 milliseconds. Yes.
Is the conscious contents, is that where it's like, where you're hearing your own voice in your head?
That's one I was going to, no, it's not.
Okay.
The voice you hear in your head, what it's saying was constructed by some structure building codelet. It was picked out by some attention codelet, and it fought for attention over here, and it won. And then you hear it in your head as it comes out this way. And these actuators is hearing it in your head. Yep. So I'll have to talk to you about that afterwards. I've been thinking about it recently. Some of these various things, for example, the Preconscious Workspace has lots of parts to itself, but the major one here is the current situational model, and I can't talk to you about all these parts or parts of all the other ones. What's the word? I'm keep losing them. The representational structure, the common currency, that's what I was looking for and I couldn't find. Common currency is the event. An event, this whole thing represents an event. There's a node that's on the names that represents the event specifically. And you've got various entities that take part, pieces of the event. They may be an object, it may be an action, it could be an emotion, it could be all sorts of things. And then you have links. These are thematic role links that come from Fillmore's case grammars where we got these things. We've got an agent link, an action link in this case, and all these. So this is the kind of representations that are out of which the larger structures are built, typically. What does the current situational model look like? It won't look like this, but we sort of draw it like this in a way. You've got stuff that comes from sensory memory, the top ends of this. You've got a perceptual scene that has both a real and a virtual part. What makes things real? Real said an event is real, or an object is real, or whatever, if I can trace it back to some current sensory input. Yeah. And if I can't, then I have to be able to trace it back to some memory. And that's virtual, but it may not be used as a memory. It may be used as a future thing. It's part of a plan. Or it may be simply abstract. It may be just daydreaming or whatever. So you have these kinds of things. And then you also have to keep track of more complex structures. Suppose my complex structure is that I have to speak to the cognitive science seminar today. This is a complex structure that's going on with me right now. And at this moment, so that's up here, at this moment, what's going on right here is that I'm talking about what the perceptual scene looks like. That's what's happened. All right. Well, maybe this is enough about LIDA directly in that model. And let's begin to talk a little about how it hooks up with things on the outside. Here's the LIDA model's family tree, if you like. The cognitive model itself draws heavily from cognitive science, as you can tell. I use all this language as terminology that you know and have heard, and so forth. Its computational architecture derives from artificial intelligence, which is part of computer science. We get that. The model gets validated, pieces of the model get validated by simulating and replicating psychological experiments that come from cognitive psychology.
And they always get replicated, right?
They always, Art is talking to us about a recent study and it said they tried to replicate 100.
Like 40% maybe?
And they got 40% of them they were able to replicate, the others they weren't. But then Lyda Barrett wrote a Barrett, you read that. It was quite convincing to me that that's the way science ought to work. There was nothing wrong with that.
And they never compared it to the other sciences either.
No, but it's true of all of them.
Yeah, it's true of all of them.
Not just psychology.
Yeah.
It's all of them. Anyway, the next thing is that every such cognitive model, where are these things implemented? There are a few of them that are implemented in artificial minds, but most of them are implemented, almost all of them are implemented in either human or animal brains. So you've got to have, they've got to be grounded in the underlying neuroscience. The same way that you want your chemistry to be grounded in the underlying physics, you got the same thing. But what we're hypothesizing and what I'm going to try to convince you of, or convince you is too strong to suggest to you, this is what I want to do, is that nonlinear dynamics is a good bridge between the cognitive model and the neuroscience. So that's what we'll be about. Cognitive models in neuroscience. We have to ground them in neuroscience. Otherwise it won't work. Cognitive processes are not easily explicated using neurons and cell assemblies. If you wanted to explain a chemical reaction, you probably want to look at elements and molecules. You don't want to look at subatomic particles. You don't want to look at muons and exons and so forth. So this is the same thing. What you really need is a high-level theory and more abstract ontology, which is what cognitive models like LIDA ought to bring to you. That's what you need to be able to do this kind of thing. So the question comes up of how to ground the LIDA model in the underlying neuroscience. And the question is, what would that even mean, to ground it? And Rabinovich has given us, he and his group have ideas of how to do that in order to bridge the content of mental processes to brain structures, thinking of those brain structures as computational devices. That's what you want to do. One needs to do three things, he says. You need to infer cognitive brain networks from the neurophysiological and imaging data, fMRIs and things of this sort. And cognitive neuroscience tries to do that, has been lots and lots of work done, and yet I still have the feeling, and I think that lots of people have the same feeling, that we're still almost in the infancy of this, that there's so much to do, that even though all this has been done, that it's only a small percentage of what needs to be done.
It's more like the third trimester.
Maybe. We need to infer cognitive mind networks, interactions between mental processes from behavioral experiments. Well, that's what the psychologists, the cognitive psychologists have been doing for decades now. And again, there's been lots and lots done. Except here, I think they may be further along than the neuroscientists, but they've been at it longer. I think they've been. And finally, what you need to do is to discover dynamical principles for cognition. Well, some of that's been done by the cognitive neuroscientists, but not a lot, as far as I can tell. Many more have been done by the cognitive psychologists. Yeah. And what I'm hoping is going to happen, that we cognitive modelers, particularly ones doing system level cognitive modeling, get more and more of this kind of thing. So far, we haven't done a lot. What we have mostly is hypotheses. But hypotheses are good because they guide research. Tell you what to do your experiments about. Okay, so we're talking how to ground LIDA in neuroscience. LIDA's common representational currency is essentially perceptual symbols a la Barcelona. How many of you know that paper? Not many. I suggest that you go and find it. It's a 1999 paper. It shouldn't be missed. Anyway, we do the representations in terms of nodes and link structures like the ones I showed you before, that kind of thing. That's the simplest kind. It can be much more complex than that. And the simpler ones are found in perceptual associative memory, and simpler ones and more complex ones are found throughout the model. Yeah. So what we need to do is to map these nodes and links onto something from the neuroscience. We have to ground them in the neuroscience. We have to say what an event node is going to be down below. And the question is, what's it going to be? Well, it's not going to be a neuron. Neurons are much, much too fine. There's nothing in the LIDA model that's likely to map to a single neuron. In fact, any single neuron, you can probably take it out and never notice it. Okay. And how about a cell assembly? Well, a cell assembly is just a collection of neurons. If you're going to map it to anything down in the neuroscience, you're going to have to map to a cell assembly. Yeah. But mapping to a cell assembly is not enough in this sense. I want to tell you the sense I mean that it's not enough. Cell assembly can be thought of as simply a network of neurons. And if you think of it as a network of neurons, that ain't going to get it. Because what you really need is the network of neurons and its dynamics. If you don't have the dynamics, you're not going to have it. It's not going to work. Yeah. So what you really want to map to are chaotic attractors or wings of chaotic attractors in an attractor landscape. At first, Freeman and company thought that they were all attractors. Later on, they tell me that they really can't map to wings of attractors, which I've never quite understood, but I take their word for it. So I'm going to pass it on to you in the most authoritative form I can give you, even though I don't understand it.
So does science proceed.
If you want, just take out wings and use chaotic attractors instead, and then I'll make that believable.
Can I ask one question along these lines, since it's so relevant? How can you become confident that cell assembly is not plausible,
No,
but chaotic attractors would be?
okay, cell assemblies by themselves can have very different dynamics
Uh-huh.
and do very different things when they have different dynamics.
Uh-huh.
For example, we'll see that the olfactory bulb will recognize various odors. And it's the same cell assembly, but it's going to recognize these different odors depending on its dynamics.
Oh, so it's
So what I'm telling you is that the topology of the cell assembly isn't enough. You've got to have its dynamics.
I see.
And there's a nice picture of one, the Lorentz attractor. And that, if you ground but we still have to say, what we want to do is to ground these nodes and link structures onto chaotic attractors in an attractor landscape, and that will ground light up. But how do we do that? How do we map nodes and link structures down to attractors? Well, cortical dynamics. Here's what happens. Sensory signals trigger a spatially distributed reorganization of cortical activity. Something's going on in the cortex. Some signal comes in from sensory stuff, internal or external sensory stuff. Yeah. That causes a reorganization. From that reorganization, the internal dynamics at the moment of the stimulus helps to shape that reorganization, the response. Yeah. It's not just what comes in from the outside, it's what's going on inside. It makes even more difference. So, the cortex dynamically and interactively creates meaning from this sensory input. Let me give you an example of this. How about odor recognition, which is what Freeman and Scarlett did. So, and how brains make chaos in order to make sense of the world, which I thought was quite a neat title. So what happens with odor recognition is that you get inhalation of a previously known odor. By the way, notice that this is happening with each breath. So it's happening quite frequently. Molecules from the odorant manage to latch on to appropriate neural receptors to the ones that where they're the key to that lock, kind of a thing. Something of the sort. It results in an electrical signal that gets passed down to the olfactory bulb, which is a cell assembly, but it's a cell assembly with its own dynamics, and it's doing something when this hits. And when this signal comes, it perturbs this olfactory bulb, it gives it a kick. And it kicks it out of its chaotic orbit. It's in a chaotic orbit because from a chaotic orbit, it's very easy to get to any kind of an orbit. So this makes it, and it's a spiking trajectory because you've got spiking neurons. That's where the trajectory is coming from. Spiking trajectory, it makes the olfactory bulb's trajectory leave that chaotic orbit. And where does it go when it leaves it? It settles into an attractor. I'm leaving out wing, put it in if you want. But it settles into some attractor. And that attractor recognizes the odor. You've got an attractor for each recognizable orbit. That's how the thing works. And now notice you've got meaning. You have a sensory thing that's come in from the outside world, and now you've got internal meaning from it. Yes.
So I'm not sure which of these things are referring to, like physicality, like the chaotic orbit. Is it like electrical things actually spinning circularly, or is that something more?
You've got all of these, billions of neurons in the olfactory bulb. I guess it'd be billions, I suppose. And each one of them is doing its thing. And so if you have a vector of spiking rates, that kind of thing.
And that's called an orbit.
Billions long, one for each neuron. And then you watch how that thing changes, how that vector changes. That's the trajectory of that olfactory bulb.
And it's called
It's hard to
chaotic
think
orbit.
about. What?
It's called a chaotic orbit because it's noisy.
It's called a chaotic orbit because it's not a limit cycle, and it doesn't do any of the other things, so we call it chaotic.
What makes it an orbit?
Oh, it roughly, it's not really an orbit. Orbits is a term that they use. They use that even though it doesn't really orbit. It doesn't come back on itself necessarily. In fact, a chaotic one can't come back on itself. So we can't have it.
I verged on trying to define orbit. There was only so much we could do last week. Give me a shot at it really quickly because it's the concept of recurrence. When you have a very multi-dimensional kind of space and you want to understand its dynamics, you take a section through it and see what happens, see how it recurs. You basically sample it at points of time, and if it returns to that, I'm not doing a very good job.
It's very hard to do.
Yeah, but the concept of an orbit does require a temporality.
Yeah.
It's a
trajectory
when it returns to this every if you sampled it every once a second, where would it be then?
Yeah.
And where it was in between then and the previous time is the orbit.
But
It's
Eugene, orbit is just another word for trajectory.
Trajectory.
That's all it
it's
is.
a trajectory that's sampled regularly.
And all you can do is
That's a good way.
follow the states of the thing
Yes.
as they change over time, period.
And it does return to that same sectioning plane.
Yeah,
Actually,
technical
it crosses
term
it
is
a
rough.
second.
Point per rate second. It's all very technical at a point. But
It
it's
comes
hard.
back, it doesn't come back necessarily where it was,
No.
but near to where it was.
Yeah, I think that's
All right.
the important part.
Let me talk to you about how to ground
Especially if
light.
it's chaotic, it'll keep coming back all over the place.
Yes. A node in Lida's PAM, perceptual associative memory, maps to an attractor wing in this underlying cell assembly, to the olfactory bulb in this case. The attractors correspond to oscillators. Again, oscillator is not the engineering use of the term. They don't really oscillate in the really technical sense, but that's what they use. So this is where a node goes to. A node goes to an attractor or to an oscillator. Think of it as an oscillator. The links between the nodes in LIDA map to phase coupling between their underlying oscillator. And we talked about that before. Yeah. So thus a node and link structure in LIDA maps to the dynamics of some underlying cell assembly. And that's how that bridging takes place. Yeah. All right. Here's a favorite of Steve's. Barham, back in 1996, modeled environmental and agent variables as chaotic oscillators in their state spaces. That's everything that happens in cognition gets modeled as dynamics in this way. So let me take you through this just briefly. High energy environmental oscillators include large objects like you and me, or even this thing is a large object, whatever, or environmental features, that wall or that screen. In what sense is this an oscillator? Think of its location, length, all the variables you want to describe it with, and watch those variables change over time. You get its trajectory, which often comes back to where it was or near where it was, close enough that you want to call it an oscillator. Okay, so you can even think of this thing as being an oscillator. Low energy environmental oscillators include sensory stimuli. Light reflects off this thing. Yeah? The light reflecting off this thing over time has a trajectory. The light coming from it has a trajectory. That trajectory is a low energy environmental oscillator. Yeah. And it's meaningful by a tight association with pertinent high energy environmental oscillators. It has very tight association with this, and the light coming off of this one would not have tight association with the light coming off that one, or with the light coming off me. Yeah. Meaningful low energy oscillators in the world coupled with low energy agent oscillators. What are the low energy oscillators in the world? The light coming off of this thing couples with rods and cones in my eye, causing, and this is a low energy internal oscillator that gets recognized by going through, by mapping down to some attractor. These perceptual oscillators couple with higher order neural oscillators to subserve recognition, memory, deliberation, goals, etc. All these things, all these mental things that are going on. Yeah.
This quite, you can deflect the answer if it's not important. It's how important is the concept of low energy? How important is that to be low energy?
It's not.
Okay.
Except that there really does tend to be a real difference between. Anyway, a subset of this oscillator, whatever gets created after this, gets passed along and gets recognized, and whatever is supposed to be done with it. Maybe I'm going to point with it. A subset of this gets broadcast. It drives action selection and a high energy agent oscillator. I've got high energy oscillators myself. These things, I can hold this. I can reach down and pick it up. Yep.
Oh, so we could say that low energy, that perception only requires low energy, but action is inherently high energy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's Thorne's view,
Yeah.
as expanded by Freeman.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. All these produce brain rhythms of various frequencies. Oh, wait, whoa. I'm sorry. Got myself messed up. We were in this one. Are we done with this? All right. Brain rhythms come in a variety of sources depending on where you put the electrodes. You put them on the scalp, you get the EEG. Then you put them on the surface of the cortex, you get another one. You put them in the cerebral spinal fluid, or you put them in an individual neuron, and you get something else. So all of them produce brain rhythms of various frequencies. And cross-frequency coupling happens routinely in lots of places in brains. A high energy activity, that's gamma, ranging from 30 to 150 hertz real quick, organizes within low frequency theta response patterns. That's 5 to 8 hertz. Yeah. So the cross-frequency, this kind of cross-frequency coupling they found, and this is the work of the cognitive neuroscientists have done this in a number of cognitive contexts: declarative memory, working memory, attention, perceptual organization. It's really, and more keep coming up all the time, this kind of thing. We've managed to talk about these rhythms in terms of an lighter model, and I'd like to close with that idea, namely the cognitive cycle, Linus cognitive cycle, as a theta gamma coupling. The cognitive cycle runs at essentially a theta cycle rate of 5 to 10 hertz, 5 to 8's close enough. It's essentially a theta cycle would be a sine wave at that. Well, if you start looking at places in the brain where you would expect things to be going on in the current cognitive cycle, it's happening. What you find is this kind of theta gamma coupling, where the gamma is amplitude modulation going up and down this way. The amplitude is being modulated, but the phase is essentially the same. And so this part of it, the theta wave part of it, is following a cognitive cycle. You have overlapping cognitive cycles, but here we're only looking in one place of the brain, not in a whole cycle of what's going on in one place. And then you get these kinds of amplitude modulations in between.
Is another way of specifying the observation that they're coupled is to say that there's a harmonic relationship between that. So for every gamma cycle, there's what, 10 or 12? Or for every theta cycle, there's 10 or 12 gammas, something of that sort. They're multiples of one another. Integer multiples.
I'm not really sure of that. But all you get when you go through and look at the waves themselves, all you see is the red one. You don't see the blue one.
You infer the blue.
What?
You infer the blue.
The blue one is modulating the red one, but
no. The gamma cycle is modulating the theta.
okay.
You get amplitude modulation.
Okay.
Well, the point is that the theta phase is predictive of the gamma amplitude. So whichever way you want to look at it,
Predictive of its amplitude.
of the gamma amplitude.
So they must be harmonically related.
I mean, the graphic is pure stuff.
Well, the problem is that the rhythms, and this is all derived from spectral analysis of very dense activity, and
But if it's true,
conceptually, you're right. Conceptually, as to whether you can actually demonstrate that in the brain.
That was my point exactly. Conceptually, you would think of it the way you say it, but it's not the way that I think you're going to find it.
I mean, if they weren't coupled and you just had two rhythms that were just co-present, they would not necessarily align at the same times.
But there's really no two. You really only have one, but that one consists of a theta rhythm with amplitude modulation at a gamma rate.
I don't get stuck on it, but if there's coupling, there has to be decoupling. And so somehow there should be a difference.
Yeah, oh, yes, absolutely.
And so I'm sure that's quantifiable, but I don't think we need to get
You
stuck
see,
on it.
It is
I
quantifiable.
think that what happens is that the coupling is a badly chosen word.
Yeah, well, I'm struggling with that word, which is why I wanted to dwell
It's
on it.
not coupling in the sense of coupled oscillators.
Oh,
Or any other sense.
Oh, well, see, I was taking it
Yeah,
more literally.
exactly. I think it's a bad,
Uh,
I didn't choose the word.
Yeah, we don't know what the causal mechanism for the correlation is.
Yes. Hang on just a minute. Some people are leaving. Stephanie wants me to get to this last one. Why are dynamics important? I'll have time for a couple of questions afterwards. Well, human cognition is a transient dynamical process. That makes it important as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Thought is in constant change. No state once gone can recur and be identical to what was before. William James. Yep.
Or Heraclitus.
It goes back that far.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But it's obvious in saying something. But all these important things are obvious actually if you get to know them. In any event, all this is because of the dynamics. Cognitive functions arise from integrated processes and distributed circuits of interconnected brain areas. All that's dynamical stuff in other language. Yep. Dynamical circuits are what cognition really is all about. And of course, for me, there's one reason that overtakes all of these others and makes dynamics important. Namely, dynamics bridges grounded system like cognitive models like the underlying neuroscience. It does what we want it to do. It makes sense. It makes our model be grounded, which I have no idea how to do it without. How do you get meaning? Thank you.
Would you mind taking it? I mean, being really indulgent